Letting go feels like losing yourself. That's why we resist it. Letting go feels like dying because something is. Most people don't talk about this part. They tell you that letting go is freeing, that surrender is peaceful, that once you stop controlling everything, life magically becomes lighter. But that's not how it feels at first. At first, letting go feels terrifying. Your mind may understand that it's time. You know the relationship is over. You know the identity no longer fits. You know the version of you that keeps pushing, fixing, controlling is exhausted. And yet, your body panics. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts race. Your nervous system reacts as if something essential is being taken away. So the question isn't, why can't I let go? The real question is, why does letting go trigger fear at such a deep physical level? Why is it that the more tightly we try to control our lives, our future, our healing, our sense of self, the more drained, anxious, and disconnected we become? And why do those moments where everything feels unclear, where you no longer know who you are or where you're going, so often appear right before the most important turning points of your life? In this video, we're not going to rush past that fear. We're going to sit with it. You'll begin to understand why the fear of letting go is not weakness. It's not failure. It's not a sign that something is wrong with you. You'll see what actually dies when you let go, and why nothing real is ever lost. And by the end, you may realize something unexpected, that what you're afraid of losing was never truly you to begin with. If control actually worked, we'd feel peaceful by now. Most of us don't realize how much of our life is built around control, not because we're power hungry, but because our nervous system was trained to survive. The human brain evolved to do three things really well: avoid uncertainty, predict the future, and keep the familiar intact. So when life feels unstable, the mind doesn't ask, what is true? It asks, what can I hold on to? And that's where control enters. Control creates the illusion of safety. Not real safety, but something that feels close enough. We control our schedules, our identities, our goals, our roles in the world. We tell ourselves, as long as I know who I am, what I'm doing, and where I'm going, I'll be okay. And on the surface, it works, especially in modern American culture. You see people who look like they're on top of their life. They're productive, self-improving, well-read, in therapy, optimizing their routines, their habits, their mindset. They're doing everything right. But then night comes, the distractions fade, the productivity stops, and suddenly there's a quiet, uncomfortable question waiting in the dark. Why do I still feel empty? Why am I still anxious? Why does peace feel just out of reach? That's the moment control starts to crack. Because control doesn't create peace. It postpones the moment you have to feel what's underneath. The truth is, control isn't about strength. It's about avoidance. It keeps you busy enough to not notice the deeper unrest. It keeps your identity intact so you don't have to question it. It keeps you moving so you don't have to stop and listen. But the cost is exhaustion. The more tightly you try to manage your life, the more your nervous system stays on high alert. And slowly, almost invisibly, control becomes a cage. Here's the fractal insight. Control doesn't make you safe. It only delays the moment you meet yourself honestly. And when life finally forces you to loosen your grip, through burnout, heartbreak, loss, or awakening, it can feel terrifying. Because now there's nothing between you and what you've been running from. And this is exactly where a deeper understanding is needed. Because as Alan Watts once explained, what feels like danger at this stage is often not the loss of safety, but the loss of an illusion. And that's where we need to go next. Death of the ego feels like death, but nothing real is lost. Alan Watts. Alan Watts understood something that most people only discover in moments of crisis. The ego doesn't experience change as growth. It experiences it as extinction. Because the ego is not who you are. It's the story you've been telling about yourself. A story that answers three questions. Who am I? When do I have value? What do I need to control to feel safe? You are this role, this identity, this path, this version of yourself that learned how to survive in the world. So when life asks you to let go of a job, a relationship, a belief, or even an image of who you thought you were becoming, that story begins to shake. And the ego doesn't say, "Oh, this is growth." It says, "I'm dying." That's why letting go doesn't feel gentle. It feels threatening. A simple way to understand this is to imagine the ego as a GPS system. For years, it has been guiding you based on what it knows, your habits, your patterns, your coping strategies. Then suddenly, the signal drops. There's no map, no direction, no clear next step. And the system panics. Not because you're in danger, but because it can no longer tell you where you are. This is where a common mistake happens. People think, if I let go, I'll fall apart. If I stop controlling, I'll lose myself. If I don't hold everything together, I won't survive. But what actually falls apart is not you. It's the illusion that control was keeping you whole. Think about how many identities you've already outgrown. The person you were 5 years ago. The version of you who needed approval. The version who stayed small to feel safe. They didn't disappear. They simply stopped running the show. Alan Watts often reminded us that the ego's fear is loud because it confuses function with existence. The ego thinks, if I'm no longer useful, I no longer exist. But you are not your usefulness. You are not your performance. You are not the story you once needed. And this brings us to a sentence worth sitting with. You're not afraid of losing yourself. You're afraid of losing the version of yourself you learned to survive with. When that realization lands, something softens, because you begin to see that what feels like death is actually a release. And once the ego loosens its grip, a deeper fear often appears. Not the fear of dying, but the fear of not knowing who you'll be without control. And that's where we need to go next. The fear isn't of emptiness, it's of not knowing who you'll be without control. Once the ego loosens its grip, something even more unsettling appears. Not fear of pain, not fear of loss, but the fear of not knowing. Because human beings are not actually afraid of nothingness. We're afraid of existing without a story, without a clear identity, without a role to play, without a script that tells us what comes next. For most of our lives, we answer the question, who am I? Through structure, through labels, through momentum. So when those structures dissolve, the mind panics again. Not because something bad is happening, but because it no longer knows how to define you. This fear often shows up in very specific moments. After a breakup, when the relationship that defined you is gone. After burnout, when the role you built your worth around collapses. After an awakening, when old beliefs stop making sense. Or even after success, when you finally reach the goal and feel strangely empty. Nothing is technically wrong. But nothing feels solid either, and that's deeply unsettling. Here's the fractal truth most people miss. That empty space isn't a void, it's a state of becoming. But because it doesn't come with instructions, the mind interprets it as danger. Imagine a seed buried underground. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. No movement, no growth, just darkness and stillness. If you didn't understand how growth works, you might think the seed is dying. But inside, everything is reorganizing. The old structure is breaking down so something more honest can form. This is exactly what happens inside you. The fear you feel isn't proof that you're lost. It's proof that your old identity is no longer sufficient. And this is where many people make a critical mistake. They rush to fill the space. A new relationship, a new project, a new label, a new version of themselves to cling to. Not because it's aligned, but because the uncertainty feels unbearable. But every time you rush to define yourself too quickly, you interrupt the process. You don't allow the deeper self to emerge. Here's the small but powerful lesson of this stage. You don't need to know who you're becoming yet. You only need to resist the urge to escape the unknown. Because clarity doesn't arrive through force, it arrives through presence. And when you stop trying to fill the space, you may notice something unexpected. You're not falling into nothing. You're being held by something quieter, deeper, and far more real than the identities you're leaving behind. And that brings us to the next question. If letting go feels like falling, why don't we actually fall apart? Letting go doesn't feel like peace at first. It feels like falling without a net. There is a moment in every real transformation where the old life is gone. But the new one hasn't appeared yet. This is the most frightening stage. Not because something is wrong, but because there is nothing familiar to hold on to. The mind looks around and asks, where is the ground? And when it can't find it, the nervous system reacts as if you're in free fall. Your body doesn't care that you're growing. It only cares that the reference points it relied on are gone. So it sends signals of danger, tightness, restlessness, a sense that you've made a mistake. This is why letting go feels like falling. But here's where Alan Watts offers a radically different perspective. He once said, "You don't fall off the universe. There is no edge to existence, no place where you can actually drop out of life. What you experience as falling is simply the mind losing its grip on where it thought the ground was." And this becomes clear when you look at real people who've gone through it. The person who leaves a stable job not because they're reckless, but because staying feels like a slow death. The person who stops playing the good child, who no longer lives for approval, even though disappointing others feels terrifying. The person who steps off the endless healing treadmill, who realizes they've been trying to fix themselves instead of finally trusting themselves. In each case, there is a moment of weightlessness, a period where nothing feels certain, where identity loosens, where the old answers no longer apply, and yet they don't disappear. Life doesn't collapse, something else begins to hold them. Not control, not certainty, but a quieter form of stability, presence, alignment, a deeper intelligence that doesn't shout, but doesn't let you fall either. Here's the small but essential lesson of this stage. The ground doesn't disappear when you let go. It just stops being where you expected, and when you stop scrambling to find solid footing, you begin to notice that the fall has a direction. Not downward, but inward. You're not losing your life. You're being guided into it. And once you stop fighting the fall, you may realize something surprising. You're not breaking apart. You're landing somewhere more real than control ever was. And this is where everything begins to integrate. You don't fall apart when you let go. You fall into yourself. This is the part most people never hear. Letting go isn't chaos. It isn't losing control of your life. It's ending the resistance to what life has been asking of you all along. When you stop gripping so tightly, you don't disappear. You settle. Not into an identity, but into a deeper sense of being. Integration is not something you do. It's something that happens when you stop forcing. You stop trying to become someone. You stop trying to fix yourself. You stop trying to prove that you're enough. And in that stopping, something very quiet takes over. You may notice subtle changes before any big external shift. You feel less pressure to explain yourself, less urgency to define who you are, less need to be seen a certain way. You're not withdrawing from life. You're no longer negotiating with it. There's more silence inside. Not emptiness, space, more room to breathe, more room to listen, more room to feel what's actually true. People often mistake this phase for stagnation, but it's not inactivity, it's recalibration. Like water finding its natural level once the shaking stops. You might still take action, you might still create, work, and move forward. But the energy behind it changes. It's no longer driven by fear, no longer fueled by the need to control outcomes, no longer rooted in proving your worth. It comes from alignment, from presence, from a quiet trust that you don't need to micromanage life for it to unfold meaningfully. This is where a deeper lesson emerges. Life does not need you to direct it. Life does not need you to direct it. It needs you to be available to it, to show up without armor, to meet each moment without rehearsing who you're supposed to be. When you let go, life doesn't punish you. It meets you, not with certainty, but with authenticity. And that authenticity feels different from control. It feels grounded, spacious, real. You begin to sense that you are not separate from the movement of life. You are not falling through it. You are in it. And when that realization lands, something settles permanently. The struggle softens. The urgency dissolves. The fear loosens its grip. You don't need to hold yourself together anymore, because you were never meant to be held that way. Letting go feels like losing yourself. That's how this journey began. But maybe what feels like losing yourself is simply losing the mask you learned to wear in order to survive. The roles, the stories, the constant effort to hold everything together. Maybe nothing essential is leaving. Maybe what's dissolving was never meant to last. And perhaps this is the part no one tells you. You don't actually need to know who you're becoming. Not yet. The mind wants certainty, a destination, a name for what comes next. But life doesn't unfold that way. Sometimes not knowing isn't a failure. It's an opening, a doorway that only appears when you stop demanding answers. So if you're in that space right now between who you were and who you can't yet define, you're not behind. You're not broken. You're not lost. You're listening. And that listening is far more intelligent than control ever was. So take this with you. Nothing real is ever lost. Only what was never you to begin with. If this resonated, don't rush to understand it. Sit with it. Let it breathe. And when you're ready, tell me in the comments, what feels hardest to let go of right now? Not to fix it, not to explain it, just to let it be seen.